What if I told you that a single diplomatic failure 2,000 years ago accidentally created the greatest trade network in human history? A network that didn't just move silk and spices, but spread religions, toppled empires, and connected half the world's population. This is the story of the Silk Road, where a Chinese emperor's war strategy became humanity's first experiment in globalization, where Buddhist monks traveled with merchant caravans, where entire civilizations rose and fell along desert routes, and where the legacy still shapes our world today. This isn't just ancient history. This is the blueprint for how our modern world was built. For over 1,000 years, a vast network of trade routes connected the civilizations of East and West, stretching from the imperial courts of China to the bustling markets of Rome. We call it the Silk Road, but it was never a single road, and silk was just one of countless treasures that flowed along its paths. This network transformed everything it touched. It carried more than merchandise. It transmitted ideas, religions, technologies, and diseases that reshaped entire continents. Empires rose and fell trying to control it. Explorers risked their lives to map it. And its influence echoes through our modern world in ways most people never realize. This is the complete story of the Silk Road, from its accidental beginning to its dramatic decline, and its surprising resurrection in the 21st century. The Silk Road didn't begin as a grand plan for international commerce. It emerged from a military problem. In 141 BC, Emperor Wu ascended the throne of Han Dynasty China. He inherited a dynasty already strained by constant warfare with the Xiongnu, Confederation fierce nomadic horsemen who repeatedly raided Chinese settlements along the northern borders, disrupting agriculture and threatening frontier stability. Emperor Wu's solution would inadvertently create the most significant trade network in ancient history. The strategic gambit Chinese intelligence had learned of the Yuezhi people, who had been driven from their homeland in the Gansu corridor by Xiongnu attacks around 174 BC. These displaced nomads had reportedly settled somewhere in the distant west. Emperor Wu conceived a strategic alliance. If China could contact the Yuezhi, they could attack the Xiongnu from two fronts simultaneously. This military calculation led to one of history's most consequential diplomatic missions. In 138 BC, Zhang Kaiyan, a palace attendant with demonstrated loyalty and organizational skills, received the dangerous assignment of locating and negotiating with the Yuezhi. His expedition force numbered approximately 100 men, including a Xiongnu guide named Gan Fu, who possessed crucial knowledge of the Western territories. 13 years of captivity. The mission encountered immediate catastrophe. Xiongnu forces captured the entire party shortly after they crossed into nomadic territory. Rather than executing their prisoners, the Xiongnu held Zhang Qian and his men in comfortable captivity for over a decade, hoping to extract information about Chinese military capabilities and frontier defenses. During his captivity, Zhang Qian observed Xiongnu society firsthand. He noted their sophisticated horse breeding techniques, mobile warfare tactics, and extensive knowledge of Central Asian geography. The Xiongnu maintained trade relationships with various oasis settlements, exchanging livestock, leather goods, and metal weapons for agricultural products and luxury items. This exposure provided Zhang Kaiyan with invaluable intelligence about the complex web of relationships, linking nomadic and sedentary populations across the steppes and desert regions. The journey west, Zhang Qian's escape around 129 BC, marked the beginning of his actual diplomatic mission. Traveling with a reduced party of survivors, he navigated treacherous mountain passes and desert routes to reach Bactria, where he discovered that the Yuezhi had indeed established a new kingdom. The diplomatic reality proved disappointing for Chinese strategic objectives. The Yuezhi, now settled in fertile valleys with access to established trade routes, showed no interest in mounting costly military campaigns against their former Xiongnu enemies. They had adapted successfully to their new environment and viewed the distant conflict as irrelevant to their current prosperity. The discovery that changed everything, despite the diplomatic failure. Zhang Qian's observations of Bactrian markets revealed extraordinary commercial possibilities. He encountered Chinese silk products that had somehow reached these Western regions through intermediary merchants, commanding prices far exceeding their original cost. Local rulers and wealthy merchants displayed silk garments as symbols of prestige, while Chinese lacquerware and bronze mirrors appeared in elite households. These goods had traveled through multiple hands across thousands of miles, with each transaction adding significant markup to their final value. The return journey in 126 BC proved equally hazardous, with Xiongnu forces again capturing Zhang Qian's party. His second escape occurred during a period of internal Xiongnu political turmoil, allowing the survivors to reach Chinese territory after 13 years of absence. Zhang Qian, as detailed reports to Emperor Wu, described not only the political landscape of Central Asia, but also the economic potential of systematic trade relationships with Western regions. From military strategy to commercial empire emperor, Wu's response demonstrated the Han dynasty's growing commercial sophistication. Rather than abandoning Western engagement after the diplomatic setback, the court authorized Zhang Qian's second expedition in 115 BC, this time with explicitly commercial objectives. This mission carried substantial quantities of Chinese silk, lacquerware, and metalwork as trade goods rather than diplomatic gifts. The expedition also included technical specialists who could assess the quality of foreign products and identify potentially profitable import opportunities. Zhang Qian's second journey established direct contact with numerous Central Asian polities, including the kingdoms of Fergana, Sogdiana, and Parthia. Each region offered distinct products and commercial opportunities. Fergana bred exceptional horses that Chinese military commanders coveted for cavalry units. Sogdian merchants demonstrated remarkable skill in long-distance trade organization, maintaining networks that connected Indian, Persian, and Mediterranean markets. Parthian territories provided access to luxury goods from the Roman Empire, including glassware, precious stones, and exotic spices. Building the infrastructure. The Han court's systematic approach to Western trade development involved establishing official markets in frontier cities where foreign merchants could exchange goods under Chinese supervision. These controlled trading posts allowed imperial officials to collect customs duties while monitoring the flow of strategic materials. Chinese silk production, concentrated in the Yangtze River Valley and surrounding regions, could now reach Western markets through organized channels rather than random intermediary transactions. Silk manufacturing represented one of China's most closely guarded technological secrets. The complex process of silkworm cultivation, cocoon harvesting, and thread production required specialized knowledge passed down through generations of artisan families. Chinese authorities imposed severe penalties on anyone attempting to export silkworms or reveal production techniques to foreigners. This monopoly ensured that all silk reaching Western markets originated from Chinese sources, creating a dependable revenue stream for the imperial treasury. The formation of regular trade networks connecting Chinese production centers with Western markets required solving numerous logistical challenges that would have seemed insurmountable to ordinary merchants. The Tarim Basin. Heart of the network, the Tarim Basin emerged as the crucial geographical nexus for East-West trade during this foundational period. This vast depression, surrounded by some of the world's highest mountain ranges, contained a series of oasis cities that provided essential services for long-distance travelers. These settlements had developed around natural water sources, fed by snowmelt from surrounding peaks, creating islands of fertility in otherwise harsh desert terrain. Kashgar, positioned at the western edge of the Tarim Basin, became the primary entry point for goods moving between Chinese territories and Central Asian markets. The city's location at the convergence of several mountain passes made it a natural gathering point for merchant caravans heading in multiple directions. Local rulers recognized the economic potential of their strategic position and invested in infrastructure improvements that attracted increased commercial traffic. Khotan, located along the southern rim of the Tarim Basin, developed particular expertise in jade processing and luxury textile production. The region's jade deposits had been exploited for centuries, but growing Chinese demand for high-quality jade objects created new commercial opportunities. Khotan's craftsmen developed sophisticated techniques for carving jade into decorative items specifically designed for Chinese markets. The city also became a secondary silk production center, using different techniques from Chinese methods and producing fabrics with distinct characteristics. Turpan, situated in a depression below sea level, offered unique advantages for long-distance travelers despite its extreme climate. The city's position provided access to reliable water sources and agricultural products, while its location allowed merchants to avoid some of the most difficult mountain crossings. Conquering the Taklamakan Desert presented the most formidable obstacle for east-west trade routes. This vast expanse of shifting sand dunes, with summer temperatures exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit and winter conditions dropping well below freezing, had claimed countless lives over the centuries. Successful desert crossing required careful timing, adequate water supplies, and experienced guides familiar with seasonal weather patterns. Merchants learned to travel during spring and autumn months when temperatures remained manageable and sandstorms occurred less frequently. Navigation across the Taklamakan relied on a combination of celestial observation, landmark recognition, and local knowledge passed down through generations of desert travelers. Experienced guides could identify subtle terrain features invisible to untrained observers, while understanding wind patterns that affected sand dune formation. Water management represented the most critical survival skill for desert travelers. Caravans carried water in specially designed leather containers that minimized evaporation while remaining portable across long distances. Merchants learned to identify underground water sources and developed techniques for locating hidden springs that could replenish their supplies. The spacing between reliable water sources determined the maximum distance caravans could travel between oasis stops. The Pamir Mountains. Roof of the world, the Pamir Mountains presented equally challenging obstacles for trade route development. These towering peaks, with many summits exceeding 20,000 feet in elevation, created a formidable barrier between Central Asian steppes and the Indian subcontinent. Mountain passes remained closed by snow for much of the year, forcing merchants to time their crossings carefully to avoid being trapped by sudden weather changes. High-altitude travel required specialized equipment and techniques unknown to merchants accustomed to desert or steppe conditions. The thin air at extreme elevations caused altitude sickness in both humans and animals, while sudden temperature drops could prove fatal to inadequately prepared travelers. Yak herds provided essential transportation services in high mountain regions where horses and camels could not function effectively. These hardy animals, adapted to extreme cold and high-altitude conditions, could carry substantial loads across terrain impossible for other domesticated animals. Local populations in mountain regions developed specialized knowledge of yak handling and route finding that proved invaluable to long-distance merchants. The knowledge network, the development of reliable route information, became crucial for expanding trade networks during this period. Successful merchants maintained detailed records of travel times, seasonal conditions, and local political situations that affected route safety. This information represented valuable commercial intelligence that experienced traders guarded carefully, while sometimes sharing with trusted partners or selling to newcomers entering the trade. Political relationships with local rulers along trade routes required constant attention and negotiation. Each oasis city or mountain kingdom maintained its own customs regulations, taxation systems, and security arrangements. Merchants needed to understand local political dynamics and maintained good relationships with authorities who could either facilitate or obstruct commercial activities. The commercial networks established during Zheng Qian's expeditions transformed dramatically during the first 3 centuries of the Common Era, evolving from sporadic diplomatic exchanges into systematic trade relationships that connected the Roman Empire directly with Han China. Roman silk obsession. Roman fascination with Chinese silk intensified considerably during the reign of Augustus, as the empire's expanding wealth created new markets for luxury goods among the senatorial class and wealthy merchants. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii reveals silk fragments in elite households, while contemporary Roman writers began documenting the social implications of silk consumption with increasing frequency. Pliny the Elder complained that Roman gold flowed eastward to pay for silk, estimating that the empire spent 50 million sesterces annually on silk imports alone, roughly 1% of the imperial treasury's annual revenue. This figure demonstrates the extraordinary scale of Roman silk demand during the early imperial period. The Roman preference for silk stemmed from multiple factors beyond mere fashion considerations. The fabric's exceptional lightness made it ideal for the Mediterranean climate, while its lustrous appearance complemented Roman aesthetic preferences for materials that displayed wealth through subtle elegance rather than ostentatious display. Roman women particularly favored silk for its draping qualities, which enhanced the flowing lines of traditional Roman garments. The Parthian middlemen. The Parthian Empire, a strategic position between Roman and Chinese territories, allowed Parthian merchants to establish themselves as indispensable intermediaries in the silk trade. Parthian traders maintained permanent representatives in both Roman Syria and Chinese frontier cities, creating communication networks that transmitted market information across thousands of miles. Parthian control over Western trade route segments enabled them to implement sophisticated pricing strategies that maximized their profits while maintaining sufficient price predictability to encourage continued Roman investment in silk purchases. They established standardized markup rates for different categories of goods, with silk commanding the highest premiums due to its exceptional demand in Roman markets. The Parthian taxation system along trade routes created both obstacles and opportunities for long-distance commerce. Parthian authorities collected customs duties at multiple points along major trade routes, but they also provided security services and maintained infrastructure that reduced overall transportation costs. The Sasanian Revolution. The rise of the Sasanian Empire in 224 AD initially disrupted established trade patterns as new rulers implemented different policies toward long-distance commerce. However, the Sasanians quickly recognized the revenue potential of silk trade taxation and developed even more systematic approaches to managing trans-Asian commerce. Sasanian officials created standardized documentation requirements for merchant caravans, established fixed fee schedules for various services, and implemented quality control measures that reduced disputes between buyers and sellers. Sasanian investment in trade infrastructure exceeded Parthian efforts in both scale and sophistication. The new empire constructed caravanserais at regular intervals along major routes, providing standardized accommodations and services for traveling merchants. These facilities included secure storage areas for valuable goods, maintenance services for pack animals, and meeting spaces where merchants could negotiate transactions with local representatives. Creating international standards. The development of standardized weights and measures across different regions represented one of the most significant achievements of the classical period trade networks. This standardization emerged from practical necessity as merchants struggled with the complexity of converting between different measurement systems used by various kingdoms and city-states along trade routes. Chinese officials took the initiative in promoting measurement standardization by establishing reference weights and measures in frontier trading, cities that foreign merchants could use for verification purposes. These standards, based on Han imperial measurements, provided reliable benchmarks for international transactions. The adoption of standardized silver currency for high-value transactions solved many of the practical problems associated with long-distance trade. Roman silver coins, particularly denarii and auri, gained acceptance throughout Central Asian markets due to their consistent weight and purity standards. Sasanian merchants developed sophisticated banking techniques that reduced the risks associated with transporting large quantities of coins across dangerous territories. They established credit arrangements that allowed merchants to deposit silver in Sasanian cities and withdraw equivalent amounts in distant locations, effectively creating the first international banking system. The merchant communities established across Central Asian trading cities during the classical period created an unexpected foundation for one of history's most significant religious transformations. These commercial networks, initially focused on silk, precious metals, and luxury goods, became the primary conduits for Buddhist ideas, texts, and artistic traditions spreading from India through Central Asia into China. Commerce as missionary work. Buddhist transmission along the Silk Road differed fundamentally from the religions earlier spread within the Indian subcontinent. Rather than moving through established political structures or existing religious hierarchies, Buddhism traveled through commercial networks where merchants from different cultural backgrounds regularly interacted and exchanged not only goods, but ideas, customs, and beliefs. The Kushan Empire, which controlled crucial segments of the trade routes during the 1st through 3rd centuries AD, played a decisive role in facilitating Buddhist expansion. Kushan rulers themselves, converts to Buddhism, actively promoted the religion while simultaneously encouraging commercial development. Emperor Kanishka, ruling from approximately 127 to 150 AD, exemplified this dual commitment by commissioning Buddhist art and architecture while maintaining policies that attracted merchants from across the known world to Kushan territories. The Gandhara synthesis. The Gandhara region encompassing parts of modern Pakistan and Afghanistan emerged as the primary artistic center where Buddhist iconography absorbed influences from Greek, Ramang, Persian, and Central Asian artistic traditions. This cultural synthesis occurred because Gandhara's position along major trade routes brought together artisans and patrons from diverse backgrounds who contributed different aesthetic preferences and technical skills to Buddhist art production. The resulting Gandhara school of Buddhist art featured realistic human figures with Greek-influenced facial features, Roman-style drapery, and Persian decorative motifs, creating a distinctive international artistic language. Gandhara sculptors developed standardized iconographic conventions for depicting Buddhist figures that could be understood across different cultural contexts. These artistic standards traveled along trade routes with merchant caravans, spreading consistent visual representations of Buddhist concepts to distant regions. Bamiyan, monument and message. The monastery complex at Bamiyan, situated in a strategic mountain valley connecting Central Asian steppes with Indian territories, became one of the most important Buddhist centers along the trade routes. The site has massive Buddha statues carved directly into cliff faces during the 3rd through 6th centuries AD served multiple functions beyond their obvious religious significance. These monuments marked Bamiyan's location for travelers navigating through complex mountain terrain, while their impressive scale demonstrated the wealth and devotion of the local Buddhist community to passing merchants and pilgrims. Bamiyan's monasteries provided essential services for long-distance travelers, including secure accommodation, medical care, and spiritual guidance. The monks maintained detailed knowledge of regional geography and seasonal travel conditions, offering route advice that proved invaluable for merchant caravans attempting to cross dangerous mountain passes. Sogdian merchants as cultural bridges. Sogdian merchants, who dominated much of the Central Asian trade during the 4th through 8th centuries AD, became particularly important agents of Buddhist transmission. Their extensive commercial networks connected Buddhist communities across thousands of miles, while their linguistic skills enabled them to translate Buddhist concepts between different languages and cultural contexts. The Sogdian language became a lingua franca for Buddhist texts and correspondence across Central Asia during this period. Sogdian translations of Sanskrit Buddhist scriptures made these teachings accessible to populations who could not read Sanskrit or Chinese, while Sogdian Buddhist correspondence connected monasteries and merchant communities across vast distances. Dunhuang, the archive of an era Dunhuang, emerged as perhaps the most significant Buddhist center along the eastern sections of the Silk Road, combining religious, commercial, and cultural functions in ways that exemplify the integration of Buddhism with trade route society. The city, as location at the convergence of multiple trade routes, made it a natural gathering point for merchants, pilgrims, and scholars traveling between China and Central Asia. The Mogao caves at Dunhuang carved and decorated between the 4th and 14th centuries AD represent the most comprehensive record of Buddhist art and culture along the Silk Road. These cave temples, numbering nearly 500 individual chambers, contain Buddhist paintings, sculptures, and manuscripts that document the evolution of Buddhist artistic styles and religious practices across nearly a millennium. The famous library cave at Dunhuang, sealed in the 11th century and rediscovered in 1900, contained over 40,000 manuscripts and printed documents that provide unprecedented insight into Buddhist intellectual life along the Silk Road, transforming Chinese thought. The transmission of Buddhism to China required extensive adaptation of Indian religious concepts to Chinese philosophical and cultural frameworks. This process involved not just translation of Sanskrit terms into Chinese language, but fundamental reinterpretation of Buddhist ideas to make them comprehensible within Chinese intellectual traditions. Kumarayeva, a Buddhist monk from Kusha, who reached Chang'an in 401 AD, revolutionized Chinese Buddhism through his translation work and teaching activities. Born to an Indian father and Khokin mother, Kumarayeva possessed the multicultural background necessary to bridge Indian Buddhist scholarship with Chinese intellectual traditions. His translations of major Mahayana texts, including the Lotus Sutra and works by Nagarjuna, established Chinese Buddhist terminology and interpretative frameworks that influenced Chinese Buddhism for centuries. The Chinese Buddhist pilgrim Fexien, who traveled from China to India between 399 and 414 AD, documented the extensive Buddhist communities he encountered along the Silk Road routes. His detailed travel account describes flourishing monasteries in cities like Khotan, Kashgar, and Gandhara, revealing how completely Buddhism had integrated into the commercial and cultural life of these trading centers. The most famous Chinese Buddhist pilgrim, Xuanzang, undertook his journey to India between 629 and 645 AD during the Tang Dynasty's Golden Age. His travels coincided with a period of unprecedented prosperity and cultural exchange along the Silk Road, allowing him to observe Buddhist communities at their peak of development and influence. Xuanzang's detailed records provide comprehensive documentation of Buddhist institutions, practices, and scholarly activities across Central Asia and India during the 7th century AD. The establishment of the Tang Dynasty in 618 AD marked the beginning of the most prosperous and culturally dynamic period in Silk Road history. Unlike their predecessors, the Tang emperors pursued an aggressive expansionist policy that extended Chinese control deep into Central Asia, creating the largest empire in Chinese history. Military conquest and administrative innovation. Emperor Taizong's military campaigns during the 630s and 640s AD systematically conquered the Tarim Basin, kingdoms that had maintained semi-independent status for centuries. The conquest of Gaoshong in 640 AD eliminated the last major independent power in the eastern Tarim Basin, while subsequent campaigns against Kusha, Kashgar, and other oasis cities brought the entire region under direct Chinese administration. The Tang protectorate system known as the Protectorate General to pacify the West-established Chinese military garrisons and administrative centers throughout Central Asia. The Protectorate headquarters at Kucha controlled a network of fortified positions extending from Dunhuang in the east to Samarkand in the west, with subsidiary commands at Kashgar, Khotan, and Karashar. Chinese military engineers constructed an extensive network of beacon towers and fortified way stations. It provided communication and logistical support for the Protectorate forces. These installations, spaced at regular intervals along major trade routes, enabled rapid transmission of military intelligence and administrative orders across the vast distances of Central Asia. The beacon tower system could relay urgent messages from Kashgar to Chang'an in less than 10 days, a remarkable achievement given the geographical obstacles involved. Chang'an, center of the world. Chang'an, the Tang capital, experienced explosive growth during this period as it became the eastern terminus of an integrated trade network extending across the entire Eurasian continent. The city's population reached approximately 1 million inhabitants by 700 AD, making it the largest city in the world at that time. The Western market in Chang'an occupied over 1,600 acres and contained more than 3,000 shops organized into specialized sections for different categories of goods. The market's international character was immediately apparent to visitors who encountered merchants speaking dozens of languages while selling products from across the known world. Persian carpets, Indian spices, Central Asian horses, and Byzantine goldwork competed for space with Chinese silk, porcelain, and lacquerware. Foreign merchants in Chang'an established permanent communities with their own temples, schools, and social organizations that maintained cultural connections to their homelands while adapting to Chinese urban life. The Sogdian merchant community, numbering several thousand individuals, constructed elaborate mansions in the city's western districts and commissioned Chinese artisans to create hybrid architectural styles that combined Central Asian and Chinese design elements. Trade diversification and innovation. The diversification of trade goods during the Tang period transformed the character of Silk Road commerce from its earlier focus on luxury items for elite consumers. While silk remained an important export product, Chinese merchants began shipping porcelain, tea, paper, and various manufactured goods that appealed to broader market segments in foreign countries. Chinese porcelain production expanded dramatically during the Tang period as potters developed new techniques for creating high-quality ceramics that could survive the rigors of long-distance transportation. Tang porcelain featured distinctive glazes and decorative styles that appealed to foreign consumers while maintaining the technical superiority that distinguished Chinese ceramics from products manufactured in other regions. Tea cultivation and processing emerged as major Chinese export industries during the Tang period, introducing this beverage to Central Asian and Middle Eastern populations who had previously been unfamiliar with tea consumption. Chinese merchants discovered that tea's lightweight and high value made it ideal for long-distance trade, while its preservation qualities enabled it to maintain quality during extended transportation periods. Cultural Renaissance. The cultural flowering that occurred along the Silk Road during the Tang period reflected the unprecedented level of international interaction facilitated by political stability and economic prosperity. Chinese poets, musicians, and artists absorbed influences from Central Asian traditions, while contributing their own innovations to the cosmopolitan culture that developed in major trading cities. Tang poetry reached its greatest heights during this period, with poets like Li Bai and Du Fu creating works that incorporated imagery and themes derived from their exposure to foreign cultures and landscapes. Li Bai's poems frequently referenced Central Asian geography, foreign customs, and international travel experiences that reflected the cosmopolitan environment of Tang society. Musical exchanges between Chinese and Central Asian traditions produced new instrumental techniques and compositional styles that influenced court entertainment and popular culture. The pipa, a stringed instrument derived from Central Asian prototypes, became central to Tang court music while undergoing modifications that adapted it to Chinese musical preferences. Religious diversity and tolerance. Religious architecture along the Silk Road during the Tang period reflected the diverse spiritual traditions that coexisted in the cosmopolitan trading cities. Buddhist temples incorporated architectural elements from Indian, Persian, and Central Asian traditions while maintaining Chinese structural principles. The giant Wild Goose Pagoda in Chang'an, built to house Buddhist scriptures brought from India by Xuanzang, exemplified the international character of Tang religious architecture. Zoroastrian fire temples in Chinese cities served Persian merchant communities while introducing Chinese populations to foreign religious practices and architectural styles. The coexistence of multiple religious traditions in Tang cities created unprecedented opportunities for theological dialogue and philosophical exchange. The Nestorian Christian community in Chang'an constructed churches that combined Byzantine architectural principles with Chinese construction techniques and decorative styles. The famous Nestorian stele, erected in 781 AD, documented the history of Christianity in China while demonstrating the sophisticated theological knowledge that developed through contact between Chinese and Middle Eastern Christian traditions. Islamic merchants and scholars began appearing in Chinese cities during the later Tang period, introducing another major religious tradition to the cosmopolitan mix of Silk Road society. The construction of the first mosques in Chinese territory required architectural innovations that adapted Islamic spatial requirements to Chinese building traditions and urban planning principles. The decline of Tang authority in Central Asia during the mid-8th century created a power vacuum that Arab military forces rapidly exploited, fundamentally altering the political, commercial, and cultural landscape of the Silk Road. The Battle of Talas and its consequences. The Arab conquest of Transoxiana, beginning with the capture of Bukhara in 709 AD and culminating in the decisive victory over Chinese forces at the Battle of Talas in 751 AD, marked the end of Chinese political dominance in Western Central Asia. The battle itself proved less significant for its immediate military consequences than for its long-term cultural and technological implications. The Arab victory resulted in the capture of numerous Chinese prisoners, including skilled artisans and craftsmen, whose knowledge would prove invaluable to Islamic technological development. Among these prisoners were papermakers whose expertise enabled the establishment of paper production facilities in Samarkand, marking the beginning of papermaking technology's westward transmission into the Islamic world. Pragmatic administration. The Umayyad and subsequent Abbasid administrations approached Central Asian governance with pragmatic flexibility that differed markedly from earlier Chinese administrative methods. Rather than imposing uniform Islamic law across diverse populations, Arab administrators developed accommodating policies that permitted local customs to continue alongside Islamic practices, provided they did not directly contradict fundamental Islamic principles. The conversion process in Central Asian territories proceeded gradually and unevenly, often following commercial and social networks rather than administrative boundaries. Sogdian merchant families, recognizing the advantages of religious affiliation with the new ruling elite, frequently adopted Islam while maintaining their established business relationships and commercial practices. Samarkand, the new commercial capital. Samarkand emerged as the preeminent Islamic commercial center in Central Asia during the 9th and 10th centuries, surpassing even Baghdad in certain categories of international trade. The city's strategic position at the convergence of routes from China, India, Persia, and the Middle East made it an ideal location for the complex commercial operations that characterized Islamic period trade. The Samanid dynasty, ruling from Bukhara between 875 and 999 AD, created the most successful synthesis of Islamic governance with Central Asian commercial traditions. The Samanids maintained nominal allegiance to the Abbasid Caliphate while exercising practical independence in managing their territory's economic and commercial affairs. Samanid silver mines in the Panjshir Valley and other locations provided the monetary foundation for expanded commercial activities throughout Central Asia and beyond. The consistent quality and weight of Samanid silver dirhams made them the preferred currency for international transactions across a vast geographical area extending from the Baltic Sea to the Indian Ocean. Revolutionary financial systems. The development of the Hawala system during this period revolutionized long-distance commercial finance by enabling merchants to transfer funds across vast distances without physically transporting precious metals or coins. This system relied on networks of trusted agents who maintained detailed records of financial obligations and periodically settled accounts through various compensation mechanisms. A merchant in Bukhara could deposit silver with a local Hawala agent and authorize a colleague in Damascus to collect equivalent value from the agent's correspondent, eliminating the risks and costs associated with transporting currency across dangerous territories. Islamic intellectual centers. Bukhara's rise as a major intellectual center complemented its commercial importance, creating a unique environment where Islamic scholarship flourished alongside international trade activities. The city's madrasas attracted students from across the Islamic world, while its libraries preserved and transmitted classical texts from Greek, Persian, and Indian sources. The famous physician and philosopher Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, spent his formative years in Bukhara, where he had access to an extraordinary collection of philosophical and scientific manuscripts that shaped his intellectual development. The translation movement that characterized Islamic intellectual life during the 9th and 10th centuries relied heavily on the cosmopolitan commercial networks that connected Islamic territories with other cultural regions. Merchants traveling to India, China, and Byzantine territories frequently carried manuscripts and books that they sold to Islamic scholars and libraries. Islamic scholars working in Central Asian cities like Samarkand and Bukhara developed sophisticated techniques for translating and preserving classical knowledge from various cultural traditions. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad served as the most famous center for this activity, but similar institutions in Central Asian cities played equally important roles in preserving and transmitting classical learning. Technology transfer. The westward transmission of papermaking technology from Samarkand to other Islamic cities created a revolution in administrative and intellectual life throughout the Islamic world. Paper production facilities established in Baghdad, Damascus, and other major cities provided affordable writing materials that enabled the expansion of bureaucratic record-keeping, commercial documentation, and scholarly writing. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge from Indian sources reached Islamic scholars primarily through commercial networks that connected Central Asian cities with Indian trading centers. Islamic mathematicians learned Indian numerical systems and computational techniques that they refined and transmitted throughout the Islamic world. The adoption of Indian numerical notation, including the concept of zero, revolutionized mathematical calculation and enabled the development of more sophisticated commercial accounting systems. Chinese technological knowledge reached Islamic territories through various channels, including captured artisans, diplomatic exchanges, and commercial relationships with Chinese merchants who continued to operate in Central Asian markets. Islamic craftsmen learned Chinese techniques for silk production, porcelain manufacture, and metallurgy, adapting these technologies to local conditions and market requirements. New trade patterns. Islamic merchants developed new categories of trade goods that reflected the religious and cultural preferences of Islamic consumers. The prohibition on silk clothing for men in Islamic law created demand for alternative luxury textiles, leading to increased trade in fine wool fabrics, cotton textiles, and various blended materials. The pilgrimage trade to Mecca created new commercial opportunities that Islamic merchants along the Silk Road exploited effectively. Pilgrims traveling from Central Asia, China, and other distant regions required transportation, accommodation, and various goods and services during their journeys. Islamic merchants established specialized businesses that catered to pilgrim needs while also using pilgrimage routes to transport commercial goods between different regions of the Islamic world. Commercial innovation, the development of Islamic commercial partnerships, known as Madaraba. Arrangements enabled merchants to pool resources and share risks in ways that facilitated larger and more ambitious trading ventures. These partnerships typically involved one party providing capital while another contributed labor and expertise, with profits shared according to predetermined formulas. Islamic commercial law's emphasis on ethical business practices and fair dealing created trust relationships that facilitated long-distance trade even between merchants who belonged to different ethnic or cultural groups. The Islamic prohibition on usury led to the development of alternative financing mechanisms that achieved similar economic functions without violating religious principles. The fragmented political landscape that had characterized Central Asia since the decline of unified Islamic authority created the perfect conditions for the most dramatic transformation in Silk Road history. By the early 13th century, competing local powers frequently disrupted commercial activities through warfare, excessive taxation, and arbitrary policy changes. Into this fractured political environment emerged Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, whose military innovations and organizational genius would create the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Rise of an empire. Born around 1162 AD into a minor Mongol clan struggling for survival on the harsh steppes north of China, Temujin's early experiences with tribal warfare, resource scarcity, and political instability shaped his understanding of the relationship between military power and economic prosperity. His rise to supremacy among the Mongol tribes between 1196 and 1206 AD demonstrated unprecedented ability to integrate diverse nomadic groups into a unified military organization capable of conquering sedentary civilizations. The Mongol military system that Genghis Khan developed represented a revolutionary synthesis of traditional steppe warfare tactics with innovative organizational structures. Mongol armies, organized around decimal units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors, created flexible command structures that could adapt rapidly to changing battlefield conditions. Each warrior maintained multiple horses, enabling Mongol forces to cover vast distances at speeds that consistently surprised their enemies. Conquest and destruction. The conquest of the Western Shang Kingdom between 1205 and 1209 had provided Genghis Khan with his first experience in governing sedentary agricultural populations. The Mongols discovered that systematic exploitation of agricultural surplus could generate far greater wealth than traditional nomadic raiding, leading to the development of administrative policies that balanced extraction of resources with maintenance of productive capacity. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire between 1219 and 1221 AD eliminated the last major obstacle to Mongol control over Central Asian trade routes. But the campaign's devastating impact on urban centers like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Merv initially disrupted commercial activities throughout the region. Contemporary accounts described the wholesale destruction of irrigation systems, the massacre of urban populations, and the abandonment of agricultural areas that had supported trade route cities for centuries. From devastation to prosperity, the recovery of Central Asian commercial centers following their initial destruction revealed the Mongols' growing understanding of the relationship between urban prosperity and imperial revenue. Mongol administrators began implementing policies designed to attract merchants and craftsmen back to devastated cities, offering tax incentives, security guarantees, and infrastructure investments that gradually restored commercial activities. Genghis Khan's legal innovations, codified in the Yasa, established uniform standards for commercial transactions, criminal justice, and administrative procedures across the vast expanse of Mongol territories. The Yasa's provisions regarding merchant protection, Contract enforcement and dispute resolution created legal frameworks that facilitated long-distance trade by reducing uncertainties and risks. The YAM system, communication revolution. The Mongol postal system known as the YAM represented the most sophisticated communication network in medieval history, enabling rapid transmission of information across distances that had previously required months or years for message delivery. The system operated through a network of relay stations, positioned at intervals of approximately 25 miles along major routes. Each station maintained fresh horses and riders, capable of carrying imperial messages at unprecedented speeds. A message from Karakorum could reach European territories in 6 weeks, while communications to Chinese territories required only 3 weeks. YAM stations provided not only communication services, but also accommodation and logistical support for authorized travelers, including merchants carrying imperial trading permits. These facilities offered secure lodging, fresh pack animals, and route information that significantly reduced the costs and risks associated with long-distance travel. The standardization of services across the entire YAM network created predictable travel conditions that enabled merchants to plan complex trading expeditions with greater confidence. The Pax Mongolica, the integration of conquered territories into a unified administrative system, required the development of standardized currency and measurement systems that could facilitate commercial transactions across culturally diverse regions. Mongol administrators adopted silver as the primary medium of exchange for high-value transactions, while permitting local currencies to continue circulating for smaller commercial activities. Mongol trade policies actively encouraged long-distance commerce through tax reductions, infrastructure investments, and diplomatic arrangements that eliminated many of the obstacles that had previously complicated international trade. The Mongols reduced or eliminated customs duties on goods transiting their territories, recognizing that increased trade volumes would generate greater total revenue than high taxation rates that discouraged commercial activities. The Pax Mongolica period extending roughly from 1260 to 1350 had created unprecedented conditions for cultural exchange and technological transmission across Eurasia. The political stability and commercial security provided by unified Mongol administration enabled scholars, artisans, and religious teachers to travel safely across vast distances, carrying ideas and techniques that would have remained isolated within their regions of origin under previous political conditions. Technology flows east and west. Chinese technological knowledge reached Middle Eastern and European territories during this period through systematic Mongol policies that relocated skilled craftsmen and scholars to regions where their expertise could contribute to imperial objectives. Chinese engineers working on Middle Eastern irrigation projects introduced new techniques for water management and agricultural development, while Chinese medical practitioners shared knowledge of surgical procedures and pharmaceutical preparations. The westward transmission of gunpowder technology during the Mongol period revolutionized military capabilities across Eurasia, though the full implications of this technological transfer would not become apparent until the 14th and 15th centuries. Mongol armies utilized Chinese explosive devices and early firearms in their European campaigns, introducing these technologies to regions that quickly recognized their military potential. Islamic astronomical and mathematical knowledge traveled eastward through Mongol networks, reaching Chinese scholars who incorporated Islamic computational techniques and observational methods into their own scientific traditions. The Yuan dynasty's astronomical bureau employed Islamic astronomers who brought sophisticated mathematical tools and theoretical frameworks that enhanced Chinese astronomical capabilities. New centers of commerce, the establishment of Mongol capitals at Karakorum and later Khanbalik created new centers for international commerce that attracted merchants from across the known world. These cities featured markets where goods from Europe, the Middle East, Central Asia, China, and India could be found in close proximity, creating commercial opportunities that had never previously existed. Marco Polo's journey to China between 1271 and 1295 AD occurred during the height of Mongol power, when the political stability and commercial infrastructure created by Mongol administration made such extended travel both possible and profitable. Polo's family belonged to a network of Venetian merchants who had recognized the commercial opportunities created by Mongol unification of Eurasian trade routes. The detailed observations recorded in Marco Polo's account provide invaluable documentation of commercial conditions, urban development, and cultural practices throughout the Mongol Empire during the late 13th century. His descriptions of Chinese cities, manufacturing techniques, and commercial practices introduced European audiences to economic possibilities that would influence European exploration and trade policies for centuries. Polo's account of paper money usage in China particularly impressed European readers who had never encountered government-issued currency not backed by precious metals. Religious and cultural tolerance. The Mongol Empire's religious tolerance policies created conditions that facilitated the spread of various religious traditions across Eurasia. Nestorian Christianity reached China in unprecedented numbers during the Mongol period, while Islamic scholars and religious teachers gained access to Chinese territories that had previously been largely closed to foreign religious influences. Buddhist monasteries in Central Asian territories received protection and support from Mongol administrators, enabling them to maintain their educational and cultural functions despite the political upheavals of the conquest period. Mongol patronage of international scholarship created intellectual communities that transcended traditional cultural boundaries. The court at Khanbalik employed scholars from across Eurasia, creating an environment where Chinese, Islamic, European, and Central Asian intellectual traditions could interact and influence each other. The empire fragments. The fragmentation of the Mongol Empire into separate khanates during the late 13th and early 14th centuries initially disrupted some of the unified administrative systems that had facilitated long-distance trade. However, the individual khanates generally maintained policies that supported commercial activities within their respective territories. The Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Eastern Europe, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia each developed administrative systems that preserved many of the commercial advantages created by unified Mongol rule while adapting to local conditions and requirements. The gradual dissolution of Mongol unity during the late 13th and early 14th centuries coincided with devastating demographic catastrophes that fundamentally altered economic foundation supporting Silk Road commerce. The plague follows the trade routes the Black Death, which swept across Eurasian trade networks between 1347 and 1351 AD, followed established commercial routes with terrifying efficiency, transforming the very pathways that had facilitated centuries of prosperity into conduits for unprecedented mortality. The plague's origins in Central Asian rodent populations meant that trading cities along traditional Silk Road routes experienced some of the highest death rates. Contemporary accounts describe the complete abandonment of entire commercial districts in cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar. The demographic collapse in Central Asian trading centers disrupted the intricate networks of commercial relationships, specialized knowledge, and financial arrangements that had sustained long-distance overland trade. Merchant families who had maintained trading partnerships across multiple generations found their operations crippled by the loss of experienced traders, local contacts, and the specialized linguistic and cultural knowledge necessary for navigating complex international transactions. The Hawala banking system, which had depended on personal relationships and reputation networks spanning thousands of miles, collapsed in many regions as key participants succumbed to disease or fled to safer territories. Infrastructure collapse. Surviving merchants discovered that the infrastructure supporting overland trade had deteriorated dramatically during the plague years. Caravanserais that had provided essential services for traveling merchants stood empty or had been converted to other purposes, while the specialized craftsmen who had maintained pack animals, repaired equipment, and provided route guidance had either died or abandoned their trades. The knowledge of seasonal travel conditions, water sources, and safe passage routes that had been accumulated over centuries of commercial experience was lost as experienced guides and caravan leaders perished without passing their expertise to successors. Political fragmentation. The political fragmentation that followed the collapse of unified Mongol administration created additional obstacles for merchants attempting to rebuild overland trading networks. The Yuan dynasty's fall in 1368 AD and replacement by the Ming dynasty marked the end of the cosmopolitan, trade-friendly policies that had characterized Mongol rule in China. The new Ming administration, led by Emperor Hongwu, implemented isolationist policies that severely restricted foreign merchant access to Chinese territories and eliminated many of the legal protections and commercial privileges that had attracted international traders to Chinese markets. Ming officials viewed foreign merchants with suspicion, considering them potential security threats who might provide intelligence to hostile powers or introduce destabilizing foreign influences into Chinese society. The tributary system that replaced open commercial relationships required foreign traders to obtain official permits, submit to extensive bureaucratic procedures, and conduct business only through government-approved channels. Tamerlane's shadow Tamerlane's campaigns during the late 14th century brought temporary political unification to much of Central Asia, but his military methods caused additional damage to the urban centers and agricultural systems that supported trade route operations. While Tamerlane's court at Samarkand became a center for artistic and intellectual activity, his frequent military campaigns disrupted commercial activities throughout the region. The Ottoman factor. The rise of the Ottoman Empire in Anatolia and the Balkans created new political dynamics that affected traditional overland trade routes connecting Asia with European markets. Ottoman control over Constantinople after 1453 AD gave them significant influence over trade between Asia and Europe. But Ottoman policies toward long-distance commerce reflected different priorities from those of earlier powers that had facilitated Silk Road trade. Ottoman taxation policies imposed substantial customs duties on goods transiting their territories, while their administrative systems created bureaucratic obstacles that delayed merchant caravans and increased operational costs. These policies made overland routes through Ottoman territories less competitive compared to maritime alternatives that could bypass Ottoman control entirely. The Portuguese exploration of maritime routes around Africa represented the most significant challenge to traditional overland Silk Road networks. Vasco da Gama changes everything. Vasco da Gama's successful voyage to India in 1497 to 1499 AD demonstrated that European merchants could reach Asian markets without relying on the complex overland networks that had previously been essential for east-west trade. The Portuguese discovery that maritime routes could deliver Asian goods to European markets at lower costs and with greater reliability marked the beginning of the end for traditional Silk Road commerce. Portuguese maritime technology, including improved ship design, navigation instruments, and sailing techniques, enabled them to transport larger cargo volumes over greater distances than had been possible with overland caravans. A single Portuguese carrack could carry as much silk as dozens of camel caravans, while the maritime route from Lisbon to Goa required only 6 to 8 months compared to the year or more needed for overland travel from China to European markets. The establishment of Portuguese trading posts at Goa, Malacca, and Macau created new commercial networks that competed directly with traditional Silk Road routes. These maritime networks offered several advantages over overland alternatives, including more reliable scheduling, reduced security risks, and simplified administrative procedures. Spain opens the Pacific. The Spanish establishment of trans-Pacific trade routes connecting the Philippines with Mexico created additional maritime alternatives to traditional overland networks. The Manila-Acapulco galleon trade, beginning in 1565 AD, enabled Asian goods to reach American and European markets through Pacific and Atlantic maritime routes that completely bypassed traditional Silk Road territories. Chinese silk, porcelain, and spices could now reach European consumers through Spanish colonial networks that offered competitive prices and reliable delivery schedules. The Dutch efficiency machine. The Dutch entry into Asian maritime trade during the early 17th century intensified competition with overland routes through their development of highly efficient commercial operations that maximized profits while minimizing costs. The Dutch East India Company's systematic approach to Asian trade included innovations in shipping technology, commercial organization, and financial management that set new standards for international commerce. China turns inward. Chinese maritime exploration under the Ming Dynasty initially appeared to offer opportunities for integrating traditional overland networks with new maritime alternatives. Admiral Zheng He, as 7 major expeditions between 1405 and 1433 AD demonstrated Chinese capabilities in long-distance maritime navigation and established diplomatic relationships with rulers throughout Southeast Asia, India, and the Western Indian Ocean. These expeditions utilized massive treasure fleets that included ships far larger than any European vessels of the period, carrying crews numbering in the thousands and cargo capacities that dwarfed contemporary European maritime operations. However, the Ming Dynasty's decision to abandon large-scale maritime expeditions after 1433 AD reflected changing priorities that favored continental defense over maritime expansion. The growing threat from northern nomadic groups, particularly the resurgent Mongol Confederation under Izan Khan, required enormous military resources that the imperial government could not simultaneously devote to both maritime exploration and continental defense. The abandonment of Zheng He's maritime program marked a crucial turning point in global trade development, as Chinese withdrawal from Indian Ocean commerce created opportunities that European maritime powers quickly exploited. The Ming Dynasty's implementation of the Haijin maritime prohibition policy further reduced Chinese participation in international maritime commerce, restricting Chinese merchants' ability to engage in overseas trade and limiting foreign access to Chinese ports. Alternative routes through Russia. The development of new overland routes connecting Russia with China through Siberian territories offered some alternatives to traditional Central Asian pathways, but these northern routes faced severe geographical and climatic obstacles that limited their commercial potential. Russian expansion into Siberia during the 16th and 17th centuries created political conditions that enabled some overland trade between European and Chinese markets to continue despite the decline of traditional Central Asian routes. However, Russian commercial policies focused primarily on fur trading and resource extraction rather than facilitating transit trade between other regions. The Treaty of Nerchinsk in 1689 resolved territorial disputes along the Amur River while creating the first formal diplomatic agreement between Russia and China. This treaty established precedents for Russian-Chinese commercial relationships that would influence trade development for the next 2 centuries. The establishment of Kayakta as the primary trading post for Russian-Chinese commerce created a new type of commercial center that differed significantly from traditional Silk Road cities. Located on the Russian-Chinese border, Kayakta functioned as a controlled interface between 2 imperial systems rather than an independent commercial hub. Regional networks persist. Regional trade networks continued operating throughout Central Asia, despite the decline of transcontinental commerce, adapting to changed political and economic conditions while maintaining many traditional commercial practices. The tea-horse trade between Chinese territories and Tibetan regions represented one of the most durable of these regional systems. continuing to operate under various political arrangements from the Tang Dynasty through the Qing period. This trade relationship reflected the complementary economic needs of agricultural Chinese communities and nomadic Tibetan populations, creating mutual dependencies that transcended political changes. Central Asian bazaar systems continued functioning as regional commercial centers, even after the decline of transcontinental trade routes, adapting their operations to serve local and regional markets rather than international commercial networks. Cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Tashkent maintained commercial districts that facilitated trade between nomadic pastoral communities and settled agricultural populations. The weakening of traditional Central Asian political structures during the early 19th century created unprecedented opportunities for European imperial expansion into territories that had remained largely independent for centuries. British India looks north. The British East India Company, as consolidation of control over the Indian subcontinent during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, provided the foundation for northward expansion towards Central Asian territories. Company officials, particularly those stationed in frontier regions like Punjab and the northwest frontier, began developing intelligence networks that extended far beyond the formal boundaries of British India. British strategic thinking regarding Central Asia reflected deep concerns about Russian expansion toward India, concerns that would shape imperial policy for nearly a century. The specter of Russian forces advancing through Central Asian territories toward the vulnerable northern frontiers of British India haunted British strategic planners, who envisioned nightmare scenarios of coordinated Russian-Persian attacks. Russia moves south. Russian expansion into Central Asia proceeded through a combination of military conquest, diplomatic pressure, and economic penetration that systematically eliminated the independence of traditional Silk Road cities. The conquest of the Kazakh steppes during the early 19th century provided Russia with strategic bases for further advances toward the settled oasis cities that controlled crucial segments of traditional trade routes. The siege and capture of Khiva in 1873 demonstrated the effectiveness of Russian military methods adapted to Central Asian conditions. General Konstantin Kaufmann's expeditionary force employed a combination of conventional infantry assault and siege artillery bombardment that overwhelmed the city as traditional fortifications. The fall of Khiva sent shockwaves throughout Central Asia as other regional rulers recognized that their traditional defensive methods could not withstand modern European military capabilities. The Khanate of Bukhara, faced with the prospect of similar treatment, negotiated a protectorate agreement that preserved nominal independence while accepting Russian control over foreign relations and military affairs. The railway transforms everything. The construction of the Trans-Caspian Railway, beginning in 1879, represented the most significant infrastructure project in Central Asian history since the original development of Silk Road networks. This railway, extending from the Caspian seaport of Krasnovodsk to Samarkand and eventually to Tashkent, created the first mechanized transportation system capable of moving large quantities of goods and passengers across Central Asian territories with unprecedented speed and reliability. The railway's completion transformed the economic geography of the region by making European manufactured goods available in Central Asian markets at competitive prices, while enabling Central Asian products to reach European consumers more efficiently than ever before. British responses to Russian railway construction reflected growing alarm about the strategic implications of improved Russian transportation capabilities in Central Asia. British military analysts recognized that the railway would enable Russia to deploy large military forces to Central Asian territories much more rapidly than had previously been possible, potentially threatening British positions in Afghanistan and northern India. The Shadow War. The competition between British and Russian intelligence networks in Central Asia created an environment of constant espionage and counter-espionage that contemporary observers dubbed the Great Game. This competition involved not only professional intelligence officers, but also explorers, merchants, diplomats, and adventurers from both empires who gathered information about political conditions, military capabilities, and geographical features of territories that remained largely unmapped by European standards. British survey operations in Central Asian territories, conducted under the auspices of the Survey of India, produced the first accurate maps of regions that had been known to Europeans only through fragmentary accounts by medieval travelers. The Great Trigonometrical Survey as extension into Central Asian territories required extraordinary courage and skill from surveyors who worked in hostile environments while maintaining the secrecy necessary to avoid detection by suspicious local authorities. The pundits, as these native surveyors were known, represented one of the most remarkable intelligence operations in imperial history. These carefully trained individuals, recruited primarily from border regions of British India, could blend into local populations while conducting sophisticated geographical and political intelligence gathering. Archaeology as imperial tool. Russian archaeological expeditions to Central Asian territories during the late 19th century combined scientific research with intelligence gathering and political assertion of imperial claims. These expeditions, often funded by the Imperial Russian Geographical Society, conducted systematic excavations at sites like Samarkand, Merv, and various locations along traditional Silk Road routes. British archaeological expeditions, led by figures like R.L. Stein, conducted extensive explorations of sites in Chinese Turkestan and other regions accessible from British India. Stein's expeditions to the Taklamakan Desert and the Tarim Basin between 1900 and 1916 resulted in the discovery of extraordinary archaeological treasures that revolutionized understanding of Silk Road history and culture. The Dunhuang discovery. Stein's discovery of the sealed library cave at Dunhuang in 1907 provided access to one of the most important collections of medieval manuscripts and documents ever found. The cave, sealed in the 11th century, contained over 40,000 documents in multiple languages and scripts that documented nearly every aspect of Silk Road civilization during its peak period. The removal of Dunhuang manuscripts and artifacts to European collections sparked controversies about cultural heritage and archaeological ethics that continue to influence international discussions about cultural property. Stein's acquisition of thousands of manuscripts, paintings, and textiles from Dunhuang for British collections was facilitated by payments to local monks who controlled access to the site, but the legitimacy of these transactions became increasingly questionable as nationalist movements in China began asserting claims to cultural patrimony. Paul Pelliot's French expedition to Central Asia, conducted simultaneously with Stein's work, employed different methods but achieved similarly significant results in documenting Silk Road heritage. Pelliot's linguistic expertise enabled him to read and evaluate manuscripts in their original languages, allowing him to select materials of particular historical and cultural significance. German expeditions to Central Asia, led by archaeologists like Albert von Lecoq, focused particularly on sites in the Tarim Basin, where German researchers conducted systematic excavations of Buddhist monasteries and associated settlements. Von Lecoq's work at sites like Bezeklik and Turban uncovered wall paintings, sculptures, and architectural remains that documented the artistic achievements of Central Asian Buddhist communities during the medieval period. Preservation through exploitation. The documentation of Silk Road heritage through archaeological expeditions occurred at a crucial historical moment when traditional cultural patterns were being disrupted by political changes and modernization efforts. Many of the sites excavated by European archaeologists are already suffering from neglect, vandalism, and natural deterioration that threaten to destroy irreplaceable cultural materials. The archaeological work, despite its problematic aspects regarding cultural ownership, preserved knowledge and artifacts that might otherwise have been lost entirely. The archaeological expeditions and colonial documentation efforts of the early 20th century had inadvertently planted the seeds for a remarkable transformation in how the world would come to understand and romanticize the ancient Silk Road, the birth of romance. As European scholars returned from Central Asian expeditions with manuscripts, artifacts, and photographs that revealed the extraordinary cultural achievements of medieval trading civilizations, a new narrative began emerging in academic circles and popular culture that would eventually reshape global perceptions of East-West connections. The publication of archaeological findings from sites like Dunhuang, Turpan, and Samarkand during the 1910s and 1920s coincided with a period of growing Western fascination with Oriental cultures and ancient civilizations. European and American audiences, weary from the devastation of World War I and increasingly skeptical of industrial modernity, found themselves captivated by accounts of ancient trading cities where diverse cultures had coexisted peacefully and prospered through commercial cooperation. German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen, IS coining of the term Seidenstraße, Silk Road, in 1877, had initially described a specific set of trade routes, but by the 1920s, the concept had evolved into something far more expansive and romantic. Popular writers and journalists began using Silk Road to describe not just historical trade networks, but an entire philosophy of cultural openness and international cooperation. Soviet transformation. The establishment of the Soviet Union fundamentally altered the political landscape of Central Asian territories that had been crucial components of historical Silk Road networks. Soviet policies towards Central Asian republics reflected complex tensions between modernization objectives and cultural preservation concerns. Soviet archaeological programs in Central Asia during the 1920s and 1930s approached Silk Road heritage from materialist historical perspectives that emphasized economic relationships and class conflicts, rather than cultural exchange and international cooperation. Soviet archaeologists conducted extensive excavations at sites throughout Central Asia, producing valuable scientific documentation while interpreting their findings according to Marxist-Leninist theoretical frameworks. The construction of modern transportation infrastructure in Soviet Central Asia created new connections between regions that had been isolated since the decline of traditional trade routes. The Turkestan-Siberia Railway, completed in 1931, linked Central Asian cotton-producing regions with industrial centers in Russia and Siberia, creating economic relationships that echoed some aspects of historical Silk Road commerce while serving very different political and economic objectives. Post-Soviet identity. The emergence of independent nation-states in Central Asia following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 created new political conditions that enabled renewed interest in Silk Road heritage as a source of national identity and international recognition. Countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan began promoting their historical connections to Silk Road civilizations as part of efforts to establish distinct national cultures and attract international tourism and investment. This post-Soviet rediscovery of Silk Road heritage often emphasized the positive aspects of historical cultural exchange while downplaying the conflicts and exploitation that had also characterized ancient trade networks. UNESCO and global recognition. UNESCO's World Heritage Program provided international recognition and preservation support for Silk Road archaeological sites beginning in the 1980s. The designation of sites like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Khiva as World Heritage locations acknowledge their outstanding universal value while providing frameworks for conservation efforts that balance preservation needs with modern development pressures. The development of international conservation projects at Silk Road sites during the 1990s and 2000s brought together expertise from multiple countries to address preservation challenges that exceeded the capabilities of individual nations. The Getty Conservation Institute's work at sites like the Mogao Caves at Dunhuang demonstrated how international cooperation could achieve conservation objectives while respecting local sovereignty and cultural values. Chinese economic reforms, beginning in the 1980s, created new opportunities for developing Western Chinese territories that included important historical Silk Road regions. The government's Western Development Strategy, launched in 2000, included substantial investments in transportation infrastructure, urban development, and tourism promotion that affected areas like Xinjiang, Gansu, and other provinces with significant Silk Road heritage. Xi Jinping's vision, the launch of China's Belt and Road Initiative in 2013, represented the most ambitious attempt to revive Silk Road connectivity since the medieval period. President Xi Jinping's announcement of the initiative during visits to Kazakhstan and Indonesia explicitly referenced historical Silk Road networks while proposing modern infrastructure development projects that would connect Asia, Europe, and Africa through land and maritime routes. The initiative's scope involving potential investments exceeding $1 trillion across more than 60 countries demonstrated China's commitment to recreating the economic integration that had characterized historical Silk Road networks. Modern infrastructure, ancient routes. The Belt and Road Initiative as land-based components include railway construction projects that follow routes similar to ancient Silk Road pathways while utilizing modern technology to overcome geographical obstacles that had challenged historical travelers. The China-Europe Railway Express Service, connecting Chinese manufacturing centers with European markets through Kazakhstan, Russia, and Belarus, enables cargo shipments to travel between China and Europe in approximately 2 weeks compared to the month or more required for maritime transportation. This service demonstrates how modern technology can revive the speed advantages that had made land routes competitive with maritime alternatives during certain historical periods. Infrastructure development projects associated with the Belt and Road Initiative include port construction, highway development, and telecommunications networks that create modern equivalents of the caravanserais, roads and communication systems that had supported historical Silk Road commerce. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, involving investments in transportation infrastructure, energy projects, and industrial development, exemplifies how contemporary connectivity projects can transform regional economic relationships while referencing historical precedents for cross-border cooperation and trade. Cultural dimensions. The Belt and Road Initiative's emphasis on cultural exchange and people-to-people connections explicitly acknowledges the cultural dimensions of historical Silk Road networks while promoting contemporary educational exchanges, tourism development, and cultural preservation projects. Chinese universities have established Confucius Institutes in Central Asian countries, while cultural festivals and artistic exchanges celebrate shared heritage and promote mutual understanding. These cultural components of the initiative recognize that successful economic integration requires the kind of cross-cultural relationships that had characterized historical Silk Road civilizations. Digital Silk Road's contemporary archaeological research at Silk Road sites continues to reveal new information about ancient trade networks while utilizing advanced technologies that enable more sophisticated analysis of archaeological evidence. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and other remote sensing technologies allow archaeologists to identify buried structures and survey large areas without destructive excavation. DNA analysis of ancient human remains provides information about population movements and cultural interactions, while chemical analysis of artifacts reveals details about trade relationships and manufacturing techniques. The application of digital technologies to Silk Road heritage preservation includes virtual reality reconstructions of ancient sites, online databases of archaeological findings, and digital archives of historical manuscripts. These technologies enable global audiences to experience Silk Road heritage without traveling to remote locations, while providing researchers with new tools for analyzing and interpreting historical evidence. Academic collaboration. International academic collaborations focused on Silk Road research bring together scholars from multiple countries to investigate questions that require expertise in diverse languages, cultures, and historical traditions. Silk Road Studies programs at various universities facilitate interdisciplinary research that combines archaeology, history, linguistics, art history, and other fields to develop comprehensive understanding of Silk Road civilizations. These collaborative approaches recognize that Silk Road history cannot be fully understood from any single national or cultural perspective. Living legacy: the influence of Silk Road cultural exchanges on contemporary art, cuisine, and cultural practices demonstrates the enduring legacy of ancient connectivity patterns. Fusion cuisine in major cities worldwide often combines ingredients and cooking techniques that originally spread along Silk Road networks, while contemporary artists draw inspiration from the multicultural artistic traditions that developed in ancient trading cities. Fashion designers incorporate textile patterns and decorative motifs that originated in Silk Road workshops, while musicians experiment with combinations of instruments and musical styles that echo the cultural synthesis that characterized medieval Central Asian cities. Tourism and economic development. Modern tourism development in Central Asian countries increasingly emphasizes Silk Road heritage as a means of attracting international visitors and generating economic benefits for local communities. Tourism infrastructure projects include hotels, restaurants, and transportation services designed to accommodate visitors interested in experiencing Silk Road history and culture. These developments create economic opportunities for local populations while raising awareness of Central Asian cultural heritage among international audiences. Preservation challenges. The challenges facing contemporary Silk Road heritage preservation include urban development pressures, climate change impacts, and the need to balance conservation objectives with economic development needs. Rapid urbanization in Central Asian cities threatens archaeological sites through construction projects and infrastructure development, while climate change affects the preservation conditions at desert sites and mountain locations. International conservation organizations work with local authorities to develop preservation strategies that protect cultural heritage while accommodating legitimate development needs. Education for the future. Educational initiatives promoting Silk Road history and cultural heritage include curriculum development projects, teacher training programs, and educational materials designed for various age groups and cultural contexts. These programs aim to increase awareness of Silk Road heritage while promoting values of cultural tolerance, international cooperation, and peaceful exchange that characterize the best aspects of historical Silk Road civilizations. Educational exchanges enable students from different countries to learn about shared heritage while developing cross-cultural understanding and communication skills. The contemporary relevance of Silk Road history extends beyond academic interest and heritage preservation to include practical lessons for modern international relations and economic development. The success of historical Silk Road networks demonstrates the benefits of cultural openness, commercial cooperation, and peaceful exchange between different civilizations. These historical examples provide models for contemporary efforts to build international partnerships and address global challenges through collaborative approaches that respect cultural diversity while pursuing common objectives. Religious communities along former Silk Road routes continue to maintain traditions and practices that preserve elements of the religious diversity that characterized ancient trading cities. Buddhist monasteries in Central Asia, Islamic institutions throughout the region, and other religious organizations serve as repositories of cultural knowledge and spiritual practices that connect contemporary communities with their historical heritage. The enduring influence of Silk Road cultural exchanges on international relations reflects the networks of trust, mutual understanding, and cooperative relationships that developed through centuries of commercial and cultural interaction. Contemporary diplomatic relationships between countries along former Silk Road routes often reference shared historical experiences and cultural connections that facilitate communication and cooperation on modern issues. The connected future. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected through digital technologies and global economic systems, the Silk Road as legacy offers both inspiration and practical guidance for managing cultural diversity and international cooperation in the 21st century. The ancient trading networks that connected civilizations across Eurasia for over a millennium demonstrate humanity's capacity for peaceful exchange and mutual benefit across cultural boundaries. While modern connectivity operates through different technologies and institutional frameworks, the fundamental principles of mutual respect, commercial cooperation, and cultural exchange that sustained the Silk Road remain relevant for addressing contemporary global challenges and opportunities. The Silk Road's transformation from historical reality to modern symbol reflects its enduring significance as a model for international cooperation and cultural exchange. From its origins in Han Dynasty diplomatic missions to its contemporary revival through China's Belt and Road Initiative, the Silk Road continues to inspire efforts to connect diverse civilizations through peaceful commerce and cultural understanding. This remarkable continuity demonstrates that the vision of a connected, cooperative world that emerged from ancient trading relationships remains a powerful force for positive change in our interconnected global civilization. The Silk Road teaches us that when we build bridges instead of walls, when we exchange ideas instead of insults, and when we seek mutual prosperity instead of zero-sum competition, humanity achieves its greatest accomplishments. The story of the Silk Road is ultimately a story of human potential, of what we can achieve when we look beyond our differences and recognize our shared humanity. If this journey through the Silk Road has fascinated you as much as it fascinated me while researching it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What aspect of Silk Road history surprised you most? Have you visited any of these ancient sites, or would you like to? Drop a comment below and let's continue this conversation. If you found this deep dive valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel. We are re-exploring more forgotten connections and hidden histories that shaped our modern world. Hit that like button if you'd like to see more content like this, and share this video with anyone who loves history, travel, or understanding how our interconnected world came to be. The Silk Road may have declined centuries ago, but its lessons about cooperation, exchange, and shared prosperity have never been more relevant. Let's keep that spirit of connection alive. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next exploration of history's hidden highways.